Testing, testing.
Raise it at the hearing.
Okay.
Welcome back. We're on the record. Council. RM78. Ms. Knoll.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I have on the screen the updated red lines after our last hearing. There's been some discussion amongst the parties and some additional language that's been raised since the last time we were here. There are two things I just want to walk the commission through before we start on new areas. The first one on the screen, there was a lot of discussion on this. I don't want to change anything substantive. I've created a new heading, which is that this is now a prohibition on serving energy assistance households on unapproved contracts. And Commissioner O'Donnell, you were concerned about the double negatives in 2. So I've removed the not and had it read only enrolled on approved contracts, so that we no longer have the not unapproved. And if that satisfies,
That works for me.
great.
Not that I'm an English major.
The next page that I want to go to is page 22. We had discussed, make sure I'm teeing up the right concept here. We had discussed at the last hearing the obligation that the supplier must acquire a written confirmation of energy assistance household status from all customers. I had relocated this at the Commission's direction into the section on, if you'll give me one moment, methods of contracting. So this is the section where we say that there needs to be affirmative consent for a customer to enroll with a supplier. And then if the supplier solicitation is in writing, and then there's a section on internet contracts, a section on telephone contracts, and then this would now be a new 5, which is basically just an obligation that when they are contracting, they need to acquire this information. RISA has proposed an alternative, which is that this become one of the minimum contracting requirements, as opposed to where I have it housed in the section on consent. I don't believe there's a huge substantive difference. I had located it here because it was a customer statement, basically, as opposed to a contract term. But it could be moved either location. We simply need commission direction on this one. Mr. Green might want to be heard.
Mr. Green.
So we did propose this. Again, it's not meant to change the substance. It's meant to do 2 things. One, to put it in the contract material terms and conditions section, so that what we talked about last Wednesday, where the customer would be making a statement in the contract as to their energy assistance status. And then second, we thought it could be worded better, and I tried to track the language of the statute, that rather than just say, generally, a supplier must acquire a written confirmation, we proposed that it say that the contract must include a statement regarding whether a customer is receiving or received during the previous fiscal year energy assistance from an energy assistance program, which is a defined term.
Do any other parties object to the RISA proposal?
This is Jake Ossender with the Maryland Office of People's Counsel. I don't know that I would object to including it in the minimum contract requirements, but I do think that, as currently worded, it expresses an affirmative obligation for the suppliers to obtain the written confirmation from energy assistance households, which I think as the ratepayer advocate, I'd be more comfortable with that language than what RISA is proposing, if I could only choose one.
Sorry, so you don't support the language in 5?
I do support the language in 5.
Okay.
I think that what I understand is that RISA is suggesting taking 5 out, and so 5 would no longer be there. Correct me if I'm wrong.
That's right,
Mr. Green. And then, in lieu of 5 being there, there would just be a provision in the minimum contract requirements that say a statement regarding whether the customer is receiving or received during the previous fiscal year energy assistance from
Should be any. Apologies.
any energy assistance program. I think we would prefer to keep 5 as it is, and we would not object to doing what RISA is suggesting in addition to keeping 5.
Mr. Green, you don't want to keep 5?
What we were trying to do was put it in the contract because the way it's written under 5, a supplier must acquire written confirmation from the customer. They're going to probably do that in the contract anyway, so let's just put it in the terms of in A, where all the, whatever it is, 27 material terms and conditions of the contract are located, so that suppliers will see it, they'll have the actual statement that they need to ascertain from or obtain from the customer.
So we don't need to hear, is what you're saying?
Correct.
Okay. And Mr. Auslander, why do we need to hear if it's going to be in the contract terms?
Well, I'm not sure that the proposal to include just a statement to that effect in the contract is the same as acquiring written confirmation.
I don't know if I agree with you there.
What's the difference?
Well, I think that the written confirmation would. I think that one of the suggestions that was discussed in previous RM78 hearings was that there would be a checkbox or some type of separate statement that the customer would be providing, and I guess that is what I understood as being acquiring written confirmation of energy assistance household. Not
Mr.
simply,
Green, are you proposing that the contract could contain a checkbox and that would satisfy this?
If the supplier wanted to do it that way, yes.
Okay,
But it
that
doesn't have
that changes the whole thing for me. Then it's not simply moving this from here to the contract. I think Mr. Auslander makes a good case. If you envision just putting a checkbox in there, people check. I understand the terms and conditions all the time, and they haven't read them.
I guess I'm not. I didn't read 5 as requiring a checkbox.
No, I asked you if you moved it to the contract, if you envisioned just putting a checkbox in there that they could check when they signed the contract. And
It would be in the contract.
right.
Right.
And you said yes, if the supplier wanted to.
I-
So I think that is different than this.
No, okay, let me back up. Because it would be a required term in the contract, and if the supplier wanted to have a mechanism where they had to check, where they wanted to bring special attention to it and check it, I see that today, for example, with variable rates. Variable rates are in the contract, but a supplier may have a special box that says, check this, you understand that your rate can change. If they wanted to do that, they can, but it has to be in the contract.
That's fine, but if you put this here, it's more than a checkbox in the contract. You got to get written confirmation.
Commissioner O'Donnell, you don't view written confirmation as a check.
I don't.
Okay. I think there may be some disagreement. Mr. Green, you would view that as written confirmation.
If I had a term in my contract and the customer signed it, that would be written confirmation of the energy assistance status. That's what I'm talking about.
Maybe it's semantics. I don't know.
Either way, there's going to be a signature at the end of the contract unless there's some exemption.
I think the commissioner's concern is that in the lengthy terms and conditions, people check boxes and sign their rights away, and they do. They do. I might part ways with my colleague here and find that a checkbox is sufficient in terms paired with a signature. I would support Reese's proposal here. How do my colleagues vote?
Okay, I think I support it as well, but I would like to just understand from OPC, what would it specifically would you be requiring with the language? Because it seems like, yes, if there is if it's very clear in the contract and a requirement, there's initial or a check next to it, that should satisfy the requirement. But I'd just like to better understand, what is it that you want to see happen
Sure,
with this language?
So I think that I would not be as comfortable with there just being a provision in the contract, and then the customer just signs the contract, and so there's written confirmation just being included with all of the other terms and conditions. I guess the way I had read 5, and I guess the way I would prefer 5 be read, and maybe we need to clarify it, is that there should be an additional, an additional confirmation by the customer, not just simply signing the contract, but something else. And I don't know that necessarily needs to be a separately signed writing, but maybe a separate statement that is initialed or.
Okay, and that's what I was trying to understand, because I know if you sign a lease or any kind of legal document, legal documents, you have to actually go through them, and then there's a initial here, initial here. Is that the type of
Maybe you get a
requirement
chance
that
to
you're envisioning in this contract?
I guess when I read written confirmation, that is what I had expected. I would not, I was not expecting that it would just be included as a provision of the contract, although I do agree with Mr. Green that I guess that is a plausible reading. When I'm reading it, I'm thinking about it from the perspective of the consumer, and so I'm thinking that the supplier is going to, make it very clear to the consumer that that they're, confirming their energy assistance household status. But if just by the terms of what's up there in 5 right now, I guess it's plausible. It would not be my preferred reading of it, but it's plausible that a supplier would simply include a term in their contract. So, and with that, having said that, maybe 5 should say that a supplier must acquire a written confirmation of energy assistance household status from all customers, separate from the, or initialed separately from other provisions in the contract.
So Mr. Chairman, I'm agreeing with Risa, but I mean, can we highlight that in the contract? I don't know practically how you do that, but I know in a lot of documents we sign, you do have to go through and specifically initial important components of that contract or that agreement. So
I think Mr. Green has a response, and we'll see. Let me just state that this is the third week and third day of this rulemaking session. Council, I see a lot of distraction at the council table today. If we could keep it to a minimum. My patience is wearing thin on this rulemaking session generally. I did ask the parties to work over the weekend to resolve these differences, and it appears that differences haven't been resolved. I've not been happy from the beginning, and I'm still not happy today. We're going to get through this. We're going to get through this today. We're going to conclude this today. And I don't know if these rules are going to work. I hope they work. People put time and effort into this legislation when it would have been just easier if we just banned retail suppliers entirely from selling to low-income supply. But now we have this Rubrik's Cube that we're trying to put together, and it's going to be a disaster for all parties involved. We're going to try to get this done. I'd like to get this done by 1 o'clock. We're going to recess at 1 o'clock. And there's lots of things that parties want to talk about, like reporting requirements that may not be in the regulations, or definitely not in the statute, with the exception of 1 or 2. So let's keep moving. We'll slap something together at this rate that will comply with the new law and we will get this done on time, and under budget by January 1st and July 1st. Mr. Auslander.
I think that I've said my piece, and
No. Do you what Ms. Knoll added? Is that what you wanted,
I think that is consistent with what I was saying. Yes.
Mr. Green?
I'd rather have it in the contract. We'll put it in bold. We'll make it conspicuous. If you want to add that type of language, I don't want a separate piece of paper or separate thing. I'd rather it be in the contract, conspicuous to the customer. But I mean,
I agree with you. I agree with you because we have contracts, we have contract summaries, we have so many pieces of paper that they're trying to give out at the door. And I see Commissioner Linton has a lot of experience with this. Let me defer.
Well, I agree with a lot of what you already said, but let me say this. Can we go to the contract summary section, the minimum contract requirements? I'm looking at a sample, a section R, which is proposed here, and a section S. So I guess my question is, do we already kind of have some of the language there? Are we talking about adding more? Are we,
I was, yes.
in addition to what's already here? Identification of the contracts for energy assistance household, a statement that it could be canceled, and so now we're adding.
Your Honor, now we would be adding a separate statement where the customer basically confirms or denies that they are or are not an energy assistance household.
So we're talking about adding a U, I guess. not a-
I think a U or
or moving them around?
Yes, I believe it would be a U. And the commission had discussed relocating this at the last hearing to align with the consent provisions, which is where I had housed them. But we can certainly, I guess, when we had discussed it, I had not been thinking of this as a contract term so much as simply a statement of the customer similar to, I consent to the contract. But it certainly can be housed here. I don't think anything about having it where it is right now would prevent it from being included on the contract. But putting it in the contract section would then require it to be there. I think the only concern is that, and Mr. Green can correct me if I'm wrong, in the majority of cases, I do not believe the customer has the contract in front of them when they provide their consent. I think there are rescission terms, I think there are follow-ups, but I think most customers either do a TPV or some kind of internet enrollment where they potentially don't have the entire document at that moment.
That's not correct. The only time, I'm sorry,
That's okay. No, please correct me.
sorry. I believe the only time a customer would not have the full contract in front of them is in a telephone setting that is exempt from the MTSA. Online enrollments, door-to-door enrollments, they'll have the entire contract in front of them.
I stand corrected.
Thank you, Ms. Knoll. Ms. Bolton.
To that point, hello, Chairman and Commissioners. Good morning. Stephanie Bolton on behalf of the Consumer Affairs Division for the Public Service Commission. I did want to note that we handle disputes from the public regarding utilities and suppliers, and by the time those complaints get to us, what we do see is the customer typically gets to review the terms of the contract on a tablet, but doesn't get a paper copy of the contract summary, terms and conditions of the contract, any of the physical, there's no physical paper copy of the contracting documents, if that's relevant.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. We recognize, tablets are often used, and the contract is emailed to the customer?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Green, you said you could live with the language in 5 that we looked at a little while ago. And you would be willing to have your position approved if it's bolded or highlighted or something. Is that right? As opposed to a separate piece of paper.
Correct.
Okay.
And let me just say, I was not trying to introduce anything controversial. I thought I was being helpful in moving it to the contract section and mandating it. Because the way I read 5,
Mr. Knoll, can we go back to 5? Thank you.
where it said a written confirmation, or written affirmation rather, or confirmation, I would be counseling my clients to put that in the contract to get the written confirmation from the customer. So it's going to be there anyway, so we might as well put it in the contract section.
And you'll put it in bold?
Certainly, if it,
Okay.
Yes.
I would support the RISA position with the language highlighted in bold or some other form. Commissioner Richard, I think you agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that will be put in the regulation so that it applies to everybody, not just your clients.
that's right.
Okay.
So-
I just want to make that clear. We got to put some language in here.
Your Honors, I've made a number of edits to the language RISA proposed, so now it would read, a statement in a prominent manner with specific written confirmation regarding whether the customer is receiving or received during the previous fiscal year energy assistance from an energy assistance program.
Prominent bolded location?
I mean, we could do bold and like minimum 12-point font or something like that, but I think the consumer protection statutes use both prominent or conspicuous, and there's case law on those terms. And we do use prominent in other places in COMAR.
Let's stick with terms we have in precedent, but Mr. Green, you understand that prominent means bold.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
All right, so
The-
we'll be,
Do I hear any objection from the bench? None. None noted.
thank you, Your Honor. Where we left off at the last hearing was on reporting requirements. And just to orient the commission, in this section, the red lines originally had that beginning July 1, an energy assistance household may only be enrolled by a supplier under a commission-approved contract for energy assistance households. One, which we handled last time, was the utilities obligation to reject enrollments for suppliers that do not have approved offers. Originally, the red lines only had this too, which is the utilities have to record this. The obligation to record was put into regulations because there is an obligation in the statute to report. The originally proposed red lines did not include any additional reporting requirements for two reasons. One, there are reporting requirements in the statute. We will not be modifying those. And two, staff has sufficient authority to acquire the information they need from our regulated entities in order to satisfy their statutory reporting requirements. So originally in the red line, it did not appear that there was any reporting requirements that were necessary in order to meet the requirements of the statute. OPC did propose a number of reporting requirements that you see on the screen, highlighted red on red. In addition, in the interim, we've received new reporting language from RISA, which retains the original first two clauses, the A and the 1. And then what RISA has done is they've reorganized the reporting requirements by what the utility is required to report, what suppliers without approved offers are required to report, and what suppliers with approved offers are required to report. Your Honor, I would recommend that if the Commission is interested in having reporting requirements in COMAR, that we let the parties take a look at this during a break, because to my knowledge, RISA is the only one who has seen this new language. If the Commission is not interested in mandating reporting requirements in statute, or I'm sorry, in regulation, because it is already in statute and staff likely has the authority they need to acquire the information, then the conversation becomes much shorter.
So, Ms. Knoll, only you've seen the RISA proposal?
I assume Brian Green's seen it as well, since he emailed it to me.
Yeah.
Mr. Green, have you shared it with any other parties?
I have not. It was late last night, and I apologize. I've been out of town for the last 4 days.
Mr. Green, what's your position on whether these reporting requirements should be codified in COMAR as opposed to addressed elsewhere?
We would prefer that they be addressed elsewhere. We think that gives the Commission more flexibility, but what I tried to do with these provisions, which is really 3 and 4, I did not attempt to touch the utility reporting requirements, was simply break it up, what OPC had proposed that was on the screen last week, and also capture in number 3 the discussion at the end of last Wednesday about suppliers having records of the notices they get from the utility that a customer is now on energy assistance, and then they have 5 business days to take action, right? So that's what 3A and B reporting is. But I only did this to be consistent with the discussion last week. If the Commission decides to do reporting by order, we would be okay with that.
Thank you. I suspect Mr. Auslander disagrees.
I think that OPC would prefer to have the reporting requirements be included in COMAR. We wouldn't object to there being maybe a reminder notice, providing further clarification to suppliers be sent out by the Commission. And I will say that although I haven't had a chance to review these provisions, I don't know that we're necessarily averse to the idea of splitting up the supplier reporting requirements among suppliers that have received Commission approval and those that haven't.
How about this? Ms. Knoll suggested that maybe during the next recess, the parties could have an opportunity to review. If there's no consensus, these requirements we are under no obligation to have them in the regulations, and we may address them elsewhere. So, Ms. Knoll, why don't we move on from here?
Thank you, Your Honor. So, Hesitate says, I think this might be the last section we have to cover, and then there are maybe 1 or 2 additional items that we'll need to look at. So this last section is about how we will make the comparison between the supplier's low-income rate and the utility default rate. So, a contract for energy assistance households must guarantee service at rates at or below the utility's SOS rate. The original proposal was that this would be for each month of the entirety of the term of the supply contract. The proposal from staff is to delete that and state instead the entire term of the contract. The intent of the original language was not to allow supplier offers where there was slightly higher charges for 3 months and then a free month, and so eventually the math worked out, but that in each kind of billing term, each month the customer would receive the benefit of the statute. Staff's language is closer to the statutory language, but I will let them discuss their preferred language.
I think staff can, our goal of that language is really to say at any moment and over the entire term of the contract, you need to be at or below SOS. I guess we thought that somehow monthly could cause a gap. But either way, I think both our language and Ms. Knoll's language were trying to accomplish similar things, which is basically at all points throughout the contract, the customer needs to be charged at or below SOS. I think ours is less broad, or not less broad. I think ours is just simpler in terms of language, but I think both accomplish similar outcomes.
Thank you. Arguments to the contrary? Or concerns with the staff language? Hearing none. Seeing no questions from the bench.
Let me ask Mr. Green a question. Is this effectively gonna ensure that nobody practices this in your industry anyway?
That nobody,
You're not gonna come in for an approved, does this ensure you're not gonna come in for an approved,
offer?
offer?
I mean, I don't know, I can't foretell what's gonna happen, months, years from now. My canvassing of market participants is that given the way the markets are today and where SOS and sales service rates are today, I don't know. I can't promise you that there will be immediate applications to the commission to get approval for an offer.
Yeah, I'm not asking for a promise, I think this whole thing is gonna be a moot point. But, okay, thank you.
Commissioner Linton.
Yeah, just a minor wordsmithing. You can take the word entire out. It's just contract, term of the contract. So it's redundant, disabled. Unless there's more to the term than the 12 months or whatever.
So I haven't done this before, but I'm going to see, I think there's enough edits to what staff versus the original did to make it unclear if you're following through the two. So the original two said that the standard offer service rate is the rate listed in the utility standard offer service tariff. The rate does not need to account for out-of-period adjustments. For billing periods which extend over more than one SOS rate, the rate for comparison will be the weighted average based on the number of days on each SOS rate. And the retail supplier's rate for comparison will include all commodity charges, including fixed charges, divided by the kilowatt hours consumed. So this was a relatively simplistic calculation. Staff's proposals, so I'm actually going to do, staff would propose that the retail supplier's rate for comparison will include all commodity charges, including fixed charges divided by the kilowatt hours consumed. So they've moved that C into the intro clause. And then for billing periods to extend over more than one SOS rate, the rate for comparison will be the weighted average based on the number of days if the customer does not have an AMI meter, or it'll be specific usage for customers that do have AMI meters. So this will require the utility to record on the date that the SOS rate changes what the customer's usage was on that date, and have the suppliers then calculate two specific charges over the course of the month. And then staff included a new requirement in 4, which is the retail supplier's rate cannot include a downward adjustment to reflect non-energy products or services that the supplier provides or offers to customers, including but not limited to gift cards, free or discounted warranties, and discounts for non-energy products. And staff, by the way, also deleted that out-of-period adjustment. So if you all want to take these one at a time, maybe we could start with the out-of-period adjustments. Does the commission want out-of-period adjustments to be part of the calculation?
What was the staff's reason for taking it out?
So 2 and 2A we took out because we believe those are already defined in the definitions that we did early in this rulemaking, where we said this is the rate that you're going to be benchmarking against, and we don't think we think out of period adjustments should be included in that. It's whatever the customer would have paid, but for being with the supplier, and that includes out of period adjustments. And when we were reviewing these before the hearings, we didn't understand what those were, but I think those were taken to be things like the true-ups for the PGAs and for the maybe there's some monthly SOS changes. I'm not entirely sure, but basically our position is if the customer was going to have to pay that rate under standard offer service, that's the rate we should be benchmarking to. So we didn't think that was a necessary addition. So that's why we struck 2 and 2A up there. We're good with the definition of 2, so we just pulled it out of there. And then and then in terms of calculating, so I guess 3. This was trying to, since the idea is that we should be charging based off of usage, since that's what we bill today for those who have AMI meters, I believe that should be a doable calculation. If the utilities believe, I think that that's transacted today, but if the utilities don't agree with that or they think that's burdensome, we can back off. But I thought that we would be able to do to easily move that information over to the supplier for the calculation of their rates in terms of using usage. But we do know some utilities don't have AMI meters, and then I would agree you would just use the days. But so really, if there's a transactional issue, staff would not be requesting that we make this harder. But if it's not a transactional issue, that's more true to what the customer would pay if they were with the utility. And then 4 is just clarifying we don't view any of the outside I guess, extras as being part of this calculation for service.
Thank you. Makes sense.
I see no objection from any parties at the table, and the utilities have been eerily quiet today. I guess this is not their issue, though. Commissioners, additional questions? No? On 2, 3, and 4? Hearing none.
And then there is an additional, so in C, there are edits in C. SFE suggested deleting the section entirely. RISA provided 2 edits in the language. So originally the language stated that if a supplier charges a customer in an energy assistance household pursuant to a contract that is not a commission approved, you know what, I apologize. I'm going to go back to the original because it's just easier to read. If supplier charges a customer in an energy assistance household pursuant to a contract that is not a commission approved contract for energy assistance households, the customer is entitled to remedies as defined in section D. And then customer remedies are below. So effectively, this simply outlines what the customer remedy is if they're on the wrong contract. The modifications is RISA has moved up a clause if a supplier without a commission approved offer for energy assistance households charges a customer in an energy assistance household pursuant to a contract that is entered into or renewed after July 1, 2023, the customer is entitled to remedies as defined in section D. So they've added the timing component, but also limited this to only suppliers without commission-approved offers.
So is the concern there that you could have a supplier that has commission-approved offers, but for some reason didn't switch the customer over? What's the purpose of including the first additional clause there, without a commission-approved offer for energy assistance households?
I thought we were just moving that phrase, contract that is not, and moving it up to the first sentence, or earlier in the sentence. I don't know that it's been a long time since I don't know that it intended to change the meaning.
Okay, that's fine. If it was, I just wanted to make sure it wasn't.
If you don't have an approved offer and you continue to charge someone, you'll suffer the consequences of D. And we limited it to, as we've discussed ad nauseum, the contracts entered into or renewed on or after July 1st.
So if I may, the original language collected all contracts that were not approved, and then this would only collect all suppliers that don't have an approved contract. So it is effectively a difference whether it was intentional or not.
If there wasn't an intent to change it, then that's, as long as it doesn't, that's fine. But it does do different things, depending on the location.
Your Honor, I think staff would want the first modification struck because we think whether you have a contract or not, it's really dependent on, is the customer on the correct contract. So even if you have an approved contract, if you charge the customer inappropriately, that needs to be fixed. I think the second one is pursuant to a decision we haven't made yet, which is how do we want to treat contracts entered into before July 1st, 2023, if we were going to do grandfathering or not. And I think that decision would determine if that language should be in or not.
We don't need to address the grandfathering issue today, though, in the regulations. Is that correct, Mr. Baker?
If we accept this edit,
We would.
Yes. Yeah, if you accept
no.
this.
If we reject this edit, we would be effectively resolving the grandfathering issue by saying that they will not be grandfathered. We have accepted these timing edits throughout in order to not address that grandfathering question.
Can I ask this? Will these edits cause suppliers without approved contracts to rush out and gather up a bunch of contracts before July of 2023? So they're effectively grandfathered?
Staff has some, I don't know if we think they're going to do it or not, but that is a possible outcome.
Oh,
We're
my,
not
this
there.
just continues to get worse.
Yeah, and even if it's not a deliberate ploy to all of a sudden accumulate these contracts, the fact remains that these pre-July 2023 contracts would, if we decide to grandfather, would remain in effect for the remainder of the term and lead to
there
the
any
same
limit-
problem.
Is there any limitation on how long that term could be in the contract?
No, sir.
That is.
Ho, ho, ho.
Now, to be fair, I did go through, and Mr. Green could help me here. I went through some supplier websites, and they're pushing, a lot of them, especially the bigger guys, are going for the fixed price contracts to avoid the whole problem with the price spikes under variable. And the contracts are typically 1, 2, 3 years. The fixed price contracts are up to 3 years, and I suspect, given hedging, they can't really go much beyond 2 or 3 years if they want to back these up with financial instruments. But yes, that is one of the concerns if there is grandfathering, regardless of whether, it's a rush to get new contract. The fact is those customers who do have the contract, I'll call it the pre-existing contract, that's pre-July 2023, are kind of stuck, no relief from this law.
Ms. Peltier, if you could be brief. I think we know where you are.
Morning, Commissioners. I wanted to share some sales I had this weekend. One, I did go on the MD Electric Choice website, and there are 4-year contracts now and 48 months. And I was at a big box store this weekend and was sold a 5-year contract. So it's the first time I've heard that. I also have to share that I was offered a price to compare for BG&E at 39 cents. I was shown the time of use. I also got a call on the phone, and it was offered, the price to compare was 26 cents.
Who are these suppliers, 39
Can I
cents?
name it?
You can.
Just Energy was in Sam's Club out in Timonium, and then Empower called my home phone, and when I asked for the price to compare, I was quoted 26 cents. So I had to share that because that's the first time. I did suggest she talk to her sales manager, and I said, are you sure about a 5-year contract? That's 60 months. So, but I am noting that if you go on the website, it's now 48 months. So we have the same, I know this is a big topic. I'm just going to share that's what I saw. So thank you very much.
Thank you. That's a good period of time to lock in for their benefit, not the customers.
Let's vote.
So, any objection? And Mr. Baker, Ms. Knoll, this language with the July 1st date is consistent with the other edits throughout the order.
Correct.
I believe
Okay.
so.
All right. Any objection from the bench?
Yeah, I object. I think this is just a nightmare, and it further cements my position that this whole thing is ill-advised,
The rulemaking.
the whole thing. I'll explain that when we get to a final vote, Mr. Chairman. I don't want to prolong this.
So why don't we do the edits one at a time? I believe I've heard a
Good.
lack of support for the change from covering contracts to covering only categories of supplier.
Benefit. So if the rest of the commissioners want it, fine, but don't do it to satisfy me because I'm not there. I'm
No,
not getting
I
there.
understand. They're very different issues, and so I want to break them out for decision purposes.
All right.
So is there anybody on the bench that wants to keep the edit, limiting this to certain categories of suppliers as opposed to covering all contracts?
Sorry, are we on C?
We are on C. So the first edit would delete, so the clause right here is that it would, originally C would cover all contracts that are not commission-approved contracts for energy assistance households. And the edit from RISA effectively would change that from all contracts to only suppliers that don't have approved offers. And would then lose the portion of the Venn diagram that covered suppliers with approved offers that had the customer on the wrong contract.
And staff opposes.
We oppose the first, we would like that struck, the second edit to be consistent across all of our regs. We would be okay leaving it.
Can I make this easy? Why don't we'll pull that, because that was not the intent of what we were trying to do.
Okay.
So the first edit, we can,
Oopsies.
Thank you, Mr. Green.
Okay,
Okay, so that's resolved.
so then we are looking, and I believe we're not going to delete this section entirely. Delete that one. So then we're left with limiting this to contracts that are entered into or renewed on or after July 1, 2023. I will accommodate that language to be identical to what we've used before. But this is the grandfathering issue. If the commission is ready today to decide that we will not grandfather contracts, then we can delete this, and that will effectively resolve that issue. If the commission is not yet ready to make that determination, then we can leave this edit in.
I'm sorry, when you say which edit, the highlighted pink?
The contracts entered into or renewed on or after July 1, 2023.
I'm operating slow today, Miss Knoll.
Understood.
I thought the including the date July 1st, 2023 is consistent with our other edits.
It is consistent with the other edits throughout, but this is the section where we give customers remedies. So everything we've done throughout has been about what the contracts need to say going forward, how the utilities need to handle these things going forward. This edit would give the customers a remedy if they are overcharged.
But and I agree with the language in C as it stands. But this language doesn't prejudge contracts entered into before July 1st.
Correct.
The commission could address that at a later date.
Correct. So putting this language in leaves you all open to address that at a later date.
That-
Removing this means you've made your determination and you will not grandfather contracts.
Thank you for the clarity. I support the language. I am not in a position to provide guidance personally with respect to contract abrogation of existing contracts.
So help me to understand how we would retain the ability to address them.
I think by not addressing it, is that right?
As long as you all have not issued a specific decision, and if general counsel's in the room, I would certainly defer to them as well. The issue remains open until the commission either, I would assume you could do an advisory opinion, or you could have a live issue in front of you.
We could wait for a complaint to arrive at CAD and then have a live controversy to actually adjudicate.
Correct.
We don't have that now.
Correct.
All the more reason I would convince my colleagues, urge my colleagues not to address this issue today.
If you do that, though, the market is going to remain with a great deal of uncertainty for likely months after the effective date of the statute.
I recognize that.
I'm okay with keeping the language. Thank you, Ms. Knoll, for the explanation.
Certainly. So the last section we have here is customer remedies. So customer remedies for a violation of B and C of this subchapter will be a refund, and originally it said of monies paid during a billing period, and it's been proposed to change for each billing period, where the supplier charged more than the standard offer service rate. The refund shall be calculated as the difference between the monies paid during the billing period and the standard offer service rate during that period. And then staff has proposed an additional section which would include interest. So the refund shall include interest based on the interest rate that is applied to a utilities refund of customer deposits under COMAR 30.01.05. The language changes in D1 are minimal. They're really preference, although I do appreciate the inclusion of C.
With respect to Montgomery County's concern in the bubble there, I agree with him that it's not the primary responsibility of the customer to calculate a refund. So, Mr. Fitzgerald, you make a good point there. I suspect the supplier will have to do a calculation. Our folks in Consumer Affairs Division will run a calculation. If the customer wants to do so, they can if they have the ability to do so, but it wouldn't be their primary responsibility. I don't think we need to explain that in the regulations, however.
Okay.
Commissioners, just would state the obvious. This is just referring to the customer remedies. Obviously, the commission under PUA 13-201 has the, separate and apart from all this under the statute, the authority to impose penalties on violations. So I just want to, just make there's no misunderstanding there. We're just signing off on what the customer remedy is, separate and apart from commission penalty that might be appropriate.
Thank you. Noted.
So I think it's just a matter of preference in terms of D1 for the language.
I have no preference. Do my colleagues? Does staff have a preference?
I think either work. So staff.
Mr. Kane, do you have a preference?
No, I don't have a preference, but we at Washington Gas, we do want to point out something about this language.
If you could make an appearance.
Good morning. This is Teresa Wall from Washington Gas, or Terry Wall. Good morning, Commissioner and Commissioners. I just wanted to bring this to your attention. If the supplier is refunding the customer directly and they are with a POR contract, that customer's rate and balance with the utility may still be there if the customer's not paying, and the customer would still be able to be turned off for non-payment. Today, the way the POR goes is if the customer is with the utility on POR, that refund is provided to the utility. So if the supplier is refunding the money to the customer, the utility is still paying the supplier for that larger amount than what is above the utility price. And the customer, if they're not paying, they can still be turned off for non-payment.
Your Honor, I believe COMAR addresses this section, this issue.
It does.
It does. I believe COMAR indicates where the refund is supposed to go depending on where the customer is in their payment status under POR.
But I see the company's concern. I mean, it doesn't say it specifically, but it kind of suggests that this is money or a remedy for the customer, which means and it says it shall be a refund. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't say it directly, but it kind of suggests that the customer is going to receive a refund directly, as opposed to it using the normal process that's in COMAR already.
Could you just cite that COMAR
I can
here?
cross-reference.
And that way it'll be clear?
Yep.
Thank you.
I just have to find that section. I was looking at it this morning, so I know it exists.
We'll leave a placeholder there.
Thank you.
Then, Mr. Chairman, there is one addition that is actually gas specific. We've been doing only electric. Let me know when it would be in this section. Though.
Okay.
So let's address,
Nobody had a preference.
nobody had a preference. I'll toss a coin. For D1B, staff has requested the inclusion of interest for monies paid between there's no time frame in there, but I would assume between when the customer is charged and when the supplier provides the refund.
Is there any objection from the bench? Seeing none. Is now the time to return to Mr. Baker's corresponding gas
Yes.
edit?
Sure.
Same section in gas in the 2059.
So just to lay the stage, some of the timing issues are different in gas than they are in electric. Electric can effectuate switches almost immediately and always within 3 days. A gas switch or drop can only be effectuated on the first of the month. And it has to be submitted at least 5 days prior to the first of the month in order to be effectuated appropriately. So if a supplier submits something on October 30th, it will not happen until December 1. So that necessitates a number of changes to the timing that's put into COMAR. So that's what we're going to address primarily when we go through the gas section. So this is the same section on customer remedies where staff has an additional edit to consider.
So staff's proposed edit was really in response to, it wasn't really in response to the switching time frame, but more in response to the, to the fact that gas prices are going to be changing at least once a month. And those usually happen around the first, but there's not really currently a set time when that's noticed to everyone. So staff's proposal was, once the gas utility makes it public, the supplier will have 5 days to update their billing systems before any of the customer remedies that we have listed here kick in. And for the supplier to basically update their billing systems and to bill the customer appropriately for those changed rates. Anything past those 5 days, then we would obviously start expecting the appropriate remedies. So this is really just this was put in place. This was proposed to basically give the suppliers a little grace period to update their billing systems for the variability, for the timing of when gas utilities update their rates.
I have a quick question about whether will the gas customer be entitled to a refund that includes interest?
Yeah, we'll make the conforming changes.
Just wanted
to what
to
was,
make sure.
yep.
And I know that's separate. But
There's a second conforming change. You don't have section C under D1.
I didn't take any of the conforming changes in the original red line,
Okay.
but I have been as the commission makes decisions.
And just to be clear, all conforming changes will be considered housekeeping and made throughout at the conclusion of the rulemaking. We won't make any additional more edits if we've already made them to the electric side.
Mr. Chairman, we have two issues with the differences between gas and electricity, and I think we're touching on them now. One is that, as I think Ms. Knowles said, you have to submit your gas switch 5 days before the end of the month. It's actually 7 days before the end of the month.
Oh.
So a supplier could get one of the notices from the utility, this particular customer is now an energy assistance household. The supplier has 5 days to take action, probably drop the customer back to sales service, but then the supplier will be on the hook for a refund until the first of the month, which could be 5 weeks away if you don't hit that 7-week window. So that's problem number one.
Isn't that another reason for the supplier not to offer these kind of contracts?
It is.
Yeah.
Well,
Unless we
but
can, go ahead.
that will happen regardless of what type of contract they're offering. Because a market rate contract where somebody suddenly goes to EUSP or any other form of assistance will have to pay that 5-week refund.
I believe that's currently in the switching COMARs, that enrollment COMARs that we put together.
Right,
Yeah.
is just a different context. This is something where the supplier's done exactly what they're supposed to do under the law as we're writing it, and within 5 days, and yet they're paying a refund for a significantly longer time. So that is issue number one, and the only answer I can think of is that the utilities would process that drop faster, but whether that's doable, I don't know. The second issue I believe we're touching on now is that, and I think it was discussed in the first day of the rulemaking 2 weeks ago, I was not here, but that suppliers won't know the price for the commodity price because it changes monthly. So our suggestion is let's just pick a price, and whether it be a quarterly price or a 6-month price, whatever the duration may be, that suppliers have to either offer or whatever, and then have that be trued up at the end of that duration. So if there's a refund component, we'll know. Or if they're serving on an approved contract and they're serving at the sales service rate, they'll know what that rate is, and at the end of the quarter or the 6-month period, whatever you may decide, there'll be a true-up process. So that otherwise, we don't know the rate we're supposed to charge if you're on an approved offer. So those are the two issues that we see as not just, I guess, policy, but operational as well.
You raise a very good point, Mr. Green.
So would it be easier to walk through the gas regs in order? We started at the end of them with this particular edit.
We did.
And we would not have to cover anywhere near as much ground. We would only have to cover the places where there are potential differences from electric.
We can. Do you believe if we do go back from the top, we'll be able to solve Mr. Green's concerns? I think they are legitimate.
I think it'll become more clear where those concerns are and how they interact throughout.
Let's do that.
So the first edit that I would flag in the gas system or the gas regulations.
Mr. Green, you don't have a proposal ready to address this, do you?
I do not.
What is the solution? I mean, we have to scrap the proposed regs here?
No, I would not be so bold as to say that.
Did you just become aware of this problem just now?
No, not the timing problem has been an issue all along. As has, frankly, the fact that we don't know the prices, to be able to charge we don't know the sales service rate, maybe in real time, to be able to charge it. That I think was discussed 2 weeks ago. I think, but I wasn't here.
So the first definition that's different from what we did above is we needed to define, we used SOS and electric and sales service in gas. So there was some question throughout as to whether or not we should use the sales service rate or the gas commodity rate or the net purchased gas charge, which is what Washington Gas proposed. Washington Gas and BG&E met over the weekend, and they've determined that gas commodity price or net purchased gas charge is something they can all live with. So if that's acceptable to the commission, that's the term that's been used throughout the regulations.
Seeing no objection.
The next place where there need to be concerns raised. This is more definitions. The licensing is the same. So the next place is, and this is very squarely what Mr. Green was raising, is this drop when a customer is newly enrolled on energy assistance. So as Mr. Green noted, when a customer is newly enrolled on SOS, they can exit an electricity supply contract very, very quickly. They cannot exit a gas contract anywhere near as quickly as they can an electric contract. So a supplier's exposure to risk of somebody who becomes newly enrolled in OHEP is relatively manageable on the electric side. It could be a maximum of 8 days. However, on the gas side, as Mr. Green noted, it's a much longer time period that they would be exposed to having to match that customer based on the decisions the commission has made. The flip side of that is that the gas price that the utility is using is a much closer to market rate price than the electricity price is. The electricity price, because it's through a laddered auction process over 2 years, lags the market significantly in some time periods, whereas the gas price is much closer to market since it's updated monthly. But this section is where the issue that Mr. Green raises. I know Mr. Green doesn't have any proposed change, but the one thing I can think of off the top of my head that we could do would be to modify the remedy. And I would say the remedy would just be to not give the customer the benefit until that switch could be effectuated.
The benefit of,
The lower price, the match to the default rate.
I think that's fair. I think that's the only thing we could possibly do. Is there any objection from the council table?
Can you say that again, please? I'm sorry.
So in what we've done in the electric, we've, so 3, the supplier shall charge the customer the supplier's current contract rate or SOS rate, whichever is lower, for the time between the supplier's receipt of the notice in Comar and the date the customer either is dropped to sales service or begins receiving service under a contract for energy assistance households. We could effectively, for the gas side, delete that requirement. So the supplier would not be required to meet the default rate, at least until the switch is effectuated.
Does that violate the statutory requirement? I think it does. I
So,
don't know that we have the authority to violate the statutory requirement.
Staff, while we're sympathetic to the problem, I think we're of the opinion the statute says you gotta be at or below SOS once they're OHEP. And I think we recognize that there's a switching problem here, but also this law was brought about because people are concerned about low-income customers paying more than they should. Well, basically than a rate they could get through the regulated process. And so, understanding that gas is more volatile and that no one really knows the price until the next month, maybe there's less concern there, and we could. But I think there has to be eventually a remedy whereby whatever the customer would have paid over whatever time frame we select, the customer is going to get re-rated to the appropriate amount. That is definitely going to introduce risk to this market, but I think that's why we took this approach that we did, where we just said until the drop can be effectuated. I would guess I would look to the gas utilities to know if any accelerated switching could occur, but I would not recommend forcing accelerated switching because of this as of today without that actually being looked at, because that was a whole other issue once upon a time on the electric side.
I think the law allows us, Mr. Chairman, with all due respect, to put the burden on the customer for an extended period of time. I think that burden has to, notwithstanding that I understand Mr. Green's argument, because I think he's right, I think that risk has to remain with the supplier because of the way the law was written, ill-advisedly.
Yeah, the law would effectively impose a penalty on suppliers, right? Because of this timetable, the switching timetable, which we all know was not the intent of the law. Ms. Knoll, I don't know what the solution is here. This is a proposed rule. It will be published in the Maryland Register, subject for notice and comment. If we take the more conservative approach, which brings harm to retail suppliers, you'll have an opportunity to provide comment at that time. Ms. Knoll, I would propose that we retain the staff language at this time, recognizing that this won't be the last time we address it.
I would agree. I hate when the options are all bad. These are both bad options, but I would agree. If we think that it's not consistent with the law, I don't see how we could put it in there for public comment. So I agree with your proposal.
Fair enough. The other issue that Mr. Green raised is when the sales service price becomes available. Did you have that in your definition?
We don't have it in the definition. Our proposal and our definition is the utility needs to post it, and then our proposal, the proposed remedy that we were discussing at the very end of all these regs was, once posted, the supplier has 5 business days to get that into their systems and start appropriately charging their customers. Because we're recognizing that it changes on a dime with the gas utilities without much advance notice or any advance notice. So because of that, we would give them 5 business days to get their systems updated for that new rate, just for practicality purposes.
And I apologize, I don't know precisely where that language is effectuated in these.
The 5 business days?
Yeah.
That's at the very end.
That's that very end.
That's the very last
And
one.
we're back where we were. We didn't actually make our lives easier by going up.
Who could have predicted that?
So we appreciate the 5-day grace period, but for most and probably all suppliers, that's going to be a manual process to consistently change that rate. Like I said earlier, I think that in our view, the more transparent and easier solution is just pick a rate and have it apply for a period of time, and then there'll be a true up at the end.
Though I would note one problem with the true up. Again, we're dealing with people who are in bad financial situation. So charging them, we appreciate the true up does over time get you back to even Steven, but for that customer who's paying $100, $200 a month extra for a certain period, getting the money back on the back end may be too little too late for them. So I think we should be very careful about allowing sort of true up over extended periods, which is why, going back where we talked about the price being below the cap or at the cap or below for the entire term of the contract, rejecting a sort of monthly application of the cap.
Mr. Green, let me ask you, who would calculate this true up, and who would effectuate it, and who would verify it, and who would enforce that it's accurate? And staff do it? Does the supplier do it? Who does it? And how do we make sure it's prudent and reasonable and just?
I think the supplier would have to do it once they receive.
And what process would the commission use to make sure that it's just and reasonable?
The rate or the true.
Yeah, the rate. We don't regulate your rates.
Yeah, it's not our rate. It's the sales service rate that we're supposed to be not exceeding.
So the gas commodity prices fluctuate all over the place, and the supplier's going to calculate a true up. And how do we make sure it's right?
It's unless there's a reporting mechanism, I don't know how you would.
And the hits keep.
But I would like to point out in response to Mr. Albert that this is not a budget billing true-up, so I don't know how much they move month to month, but this is not a situation where someone's paying a flat and then a flat bill monthly for supply, and then they get hit with something big at the end. It's simply a rated adjustment based on the usage and the price fluctuation. So I think Mr. Albert was thinking of a budget bill, and that's not what this would be.
In response to one of the things Mr. Green brought up, in SCB we've been discussing how we're going to update supplier bills for new language that is required by the commission or by the utilities for whatever reason. We're going to give the current straw man is that we're going to give them 10 business days to update their systems for that new language. I proposed 5 business days here because we were only talking about a rate. We weren't talking about a redesign of a bill. But the suppliers through that process have said if we gave them 10 business days to get new language on the bill, they could do that. So that's why I proposed 5 here, but 10 is what we know that they, at least some of those technical people on the supplier side have told me they can do for putting new language on a bill in SCB. So I didn't view 5 to be too burdensome, but if that is true, we are doing 10 in SCB for language.
If the commissioners are interested in making that change.
Additional days? Mr. Green, did you say 10? 10 business days?
I mean, what I'm told from my clients is that these would be either manual, so certainly 10 is better than 5, but that most suppliers will do it, that the price changes take effect once invoicing occurs, and they're based on billing cycles. Not, so operationally, this is not ideal by any stretch, but again, 10 business days is better than 5.
Seeing no objection, granting 10 business days.
I'm sorry,
Oh.
just a question, and so there is other, we don't have it in front of us now, but there's another section in Comar that gives the time frame for a drop on the gas side. It's not 10 days. I think it's 5, and I don't even bring my Comar with me, I don't know why, but if anybody recalls that, I just want to make sure we're not creating a conflict between the current drop period for every other contract, but then we're extending it by an additional 5 days on the gas side only. I don't know, maybe.
It's 7 days.
7 days, okay.
Yeah.
I think so.
So what we're proposing 10 here, does that create a concern or problem for the company? No? All right. Any other gas company? I know there's at least one more.
Right.
No? All right. No concern.
All right. We'll move on.
Your Honor, there's one additional issue that I've been made aware of, which is that Baltimore Gas and Electric may have concerns with the way we've limited the definitions to electric on the electric side and gas on the gas side. They do not produce fuel-specific flags in their systems. I understand they've done some work over the weekend and may have a proposal on this issue.
If Baltimore Gas Electric would please approach so we could hear your proposal. Going once. Thank you, Mr. Belay. If we could hear your proposal.
Sure, no problem. Good afternoon, Chairman, Commissioners. I have a couple of people here who are going to be better able to explain it than I, so I'm going to turn the mic over to them.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Kevin Campbell, Baltimore Gas and Electric. Our concern is it's not so much that we don't have the ability to separate the flags. It's that the system currently shows a OHEP as one, and we don't. Trying to think the exact wording for it. Yeah.
Mr. Khan.
Yeah, David Kahn, C-O-N-N with BGE. I think what Mr. Campbell was starting to say is that generally when a customer receives approval for a grant from OHEP, our system will flag that account as an OHEP recipient. There are sort of sub-designations based on the type of grant, whether it's an electric bill assistance grant, a MEP grant, etc. It would certainly be more challenging and complicated to try to sort out the electric retail supply customers from the gas retail supply customers based on the type of grant that they got from OHEP. Far simpler, I think, for everybody would be if we could just declare a customer who received any OHEP grant as an OHEP customer, and then the rules that we've been talking about presumably would apply to that customer regardless of whether they're receiving retail supply from an electric or a gas supply.
Mr. Khan, that was the issue we addressed on day one of this rulemaking session, that OPC was advocating it applied to everybody. So isn't this a good position for BGE to be in?
Isn't which position a good position for us?
It appears that you're bringing us a problem. But if I recall, Mr. Auslander was advocating, instead of keeping electric with electric, gas with gas, you're stating that any customer, whether electric or gas, that is flagged in your system as receiving OHEPA systems would receive the benefit of the statute.
Yeah, and I think, and Ms. Knoll can correct me if I have it wrong, I think that the language as it stands bifurcates, so that's different.
It does.
Yeah.
It does.
And so what we'd like to propose is unbifurcating that just for dual service. Well, it technically would apply to all utilities, but really it would only apply to us.
Right. The whole reason we voted the other way was because it was going to be very difficult for Washington Gas and Pepco to be coordinating with each other for a single customer that receives OHEP assistance. Miss Knoll.
I was just, I don't know if they have language to propose, but I was just adding a clause that for dual service utilities, we would basically have the exact same language and then put qualified for an electric or gas assistance program.
Would that work for you, Mr. Khan? Or could you just seek a waiver of the commission to offer enhanced protections, seeking waiver of this provision?
I'm going to need to turn to our attorneys for that. I'm not.
Okay.
familiar
All
with
right. Ms. Knoll's writing in the meantime.
Okay.
You want to go above and beyond the regulations here.
Well, the regulations as they were drafted to date, but I think depending on what Ms. Knoll writes, if they become the regs, then we're happy to comply with it. We don't want to put a single service utility, electric only or gas only, in a position of having to comply with regulations that they can't.
Right. And that's why we voted the way we did.
Right. But we think this could serve all those utilities' purposes and OPC's.
Let's remain silent for just one moment.
So effectively what I've done here is I've added a second section, which is for dual service utilities, which will effectively be BG&E, and I'll need to ascertain whether we have a definition of dual service, and potentially write one if necessary. And then I simply copied the entire definition, its entirety, with the only change being qualified for an electric or gas assistance program. And I can make this conforming edit in the gas section as well.
Mr. Khan, does this work? Or Mr. Baleo?
Thank you, Your Honor. I think we're digesting it. I just wanted to alert Ms. Knoll that my colleague did email you some language a little earlier. You may not have gotten it, but this might be sufficient.
When did you email the proposal?
I think at the beginning of the proceeding.
Oh, that's why she hasn't seen it.
I apologize, I'm specifically not in my email when I'm sharing my screen.
Okay, I'm getting a yes. We are okay with
Yes,
this.
okay. Mr. Trout?
The language that Ms. Knoll has posted, which is restricted to a dual service utility, does not create any new problems. And so it's acceptable to Potomac Edison as well.
Thank you. I gathered that, but I appreciate the confirmation.
And Mr. Chairman, I know that Ms. Knoll will catch this, but once a copy editor, always a copy editor, there's a period that I think wants to be a comma.
Okay.
I think it's a comma and you just can't tell because of the underline.
All right, there we go. And grammatical and punctuation we will clean up before publication. Thank you to BG.
Your Honor, that brings us full circle back to reporting requirements.
I've thought about reporting requirements. Ms. Knoll, is this the last issue?
Yes, Your Honor.
I believe it would be appropriate, and I'll turn to my colleagues to get their input, and if I'm outvoted, so be it. I think it would be best for the commission to address the non-statutory reporting requirements off-bench in a future order, or staff through data requests may have that ability to get this information. I do recognize, Ms. Knoll, that when we last left off, we did actually approve some reporting requirements, did we not?
Correct. For the utility.
For the utility. Can you scroll back to that section there?
Right here.
I'll be there.
And these are statutorily required, correct?
I don't believe.
So, statutorily required, there are 6 requirements in statute. The first one is the names and number of suppliers that applied to serve energy assistance households. The commission should have that information. 2 is the names and total number of suppliers that were approved. We should have that information. 3 is the total number of suppliers that were rejected. We should have that. 4 is the total number of energy assistance households that were signed up with a third-party supplier as reported by the supplier. I believe staff has the ability to get that information on a regular basis. 5 is the total number of submitted supplier enrollments that were denied because the supplier was not approved to serve energy assistance households as reported by the utility. So A1 is the requirement that the utilities reject those enrollments. And so I simply added a 2 here that they needed to record that so that they would know that they were going to be on the hook to report that to us. Everything below 2 has been added by other parties. And then 6 is the total number of self-identified energy assistance households that filed complaints about their third-party supplier, and that would be something that our Consumer Affairs Division would develop. So effectively, 5 in our reporting requirements and 4 are the only 2 things we need to come from outside the commission. So I simply create an obligation in the regulations for the utilities to maintain the information for us.
I recognize that the commission agreed to these informally on our last meeting, and I'm not inclined to disturb them. I'd rather we not proceed with additional reporting requirements. Mr. Baker, were you nodding in agreement with
Well,
that?
I was actually just going to say staff would be very comfortable with deleting any reporting requirements in Comar.
Deleting these?
Yes, and just asking us, or I was going to say a good work group to send this through might be the CMC. Mr. Chen might not thank me, but the CMCC work group, where where we do supplier market enhancements and ask for a recommendation for what should be reported, and that just be done through order.
You're just talking about the
Non-statutory.
Non-statutory
Right.
provisions.
So, because I think it would be good for everyone to know what we do want to see, but I think it would be cleaner if it was just done through an order, and all the parties just have a minute to sit down and talk through what is actually needed instead of us all putting our wish list forward right now.
That seems more fair, and the fact that I was just suggesting a half and half. We include the utility ones, and not include the supplier and the OPC requirements. I would support your proposal that we strike all the non-statutory, all the extracurricular reporting requirements, and have that taken up outside, and we could provide direction in a future order. And Mr. Green, that's what you wanted, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do commissioners object?
I don't object, but I just wanted to get a clarification. I think you were very clear, but we did hear earlier today that RISA is offering some language, some reporting language. And going back to our discussion last week, there was discussion as to whether or not we had the information needed, we being the commission, so that we could proactively enforce. And I'm specifically talking about in those circumstances where retail supplier receives a drop and does not actually drop that customer, and then creating a problem for that OHEP customer. Right. So, sorry, are you comfortable that one, with your recommendation that we can do all of this, we can provide the necessary information in a rulemaking so that we have that ability to be a backstop, if you will, in enforcement, effectively backstop in enforcement, and you specifically don't believe we need the RISA language.
Well, I haven't had a chance to look through RISA's language. I think this is almost saying to play it safe because I might want more than what RISA's putting forward, or I might want something different than what they've put forward. I might be also fine with what's there. It's just what I think it would make sense is for us, the group, to direction from the commission in terms of do you want proactive enforcement? I assume you do, but and who you would want that coming from, and at that point in time, the parties talk about what is a reasonable information to be gathering from the market and who it should come from, and then the commission just has an order that says you will report this to us on this basis, and here's the information. So what we were already going to try and do through regs, what RISA had put forward, what OPC has put forward, what staff was verbally putting forward last week, cleaner to just everyone sit down, come up with a reasonable request, and then commission tell. I mean, it would be helpful if we know who you want to lead that effort instead of it just being left in the ether. While staff always has data request authority, it would be cleaner if we know directly that, and the parties know directly, staff or somebody from the commission is going to expect this information in order to do the proactive enforcement.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I think you would agree that while this is a difficult law to, I guess, put into regulation, it is an important law. I think there are some important new protections for OHEP customers. And so I guess just speaking from my point of view, I would hope that we would get those regulations out right away to provide the guidance to retail suppliers so that we can be active at the commission. If we're not going to, as I stated earlier, my preference would be that those customers just be dropped once they no longer, those OHEP customers no longer had I guess a product that was compliant. But could I just ask one other question? Ms. Peltier, I'm sorry, I always put you on the spot, but would you mind just responding? Because I'm inclined to be supportive of a strong order, but is this what you had in mind when you, you suggested we needed to have, the ability to enforce this from the commission?
Thank you. Can I read back what I heard? Just
Sure.
to make sure. What I heard is that the COMAR regulations won't have reporting in it, but there'll be a future part of PC 44 or CMCC that will go through with all the work groups what reporting is required. Did I get that right?
Not quite. Not quite. It will have the statutory reporting requirements.
Yeah, we have to do
Anything above and beyond the statutory will be as you described.
Oh, okay, so, right.
But just the
The
staff
stick.
says we can get the information we need. We have the authority already to do that, and that we could do so and be very, prescriptive in an order.
I think that's, if there's a commitment to an order, and I think that's fair. I think if by July 1st that commitment and that order and the working group is done, and there's the two lists, how many were dropped by supplier and how many did the supplier drop, and it was made relatively publicly available in a decent frame of time, I think that's fair. And if I think from advocates' point of view, if we hear that as a commitment from the bench, I think that sounds like a good idea.
Thank you. Thank you for that response.
Thank you.
And it's certainly, that's my intention, and it's what I've heard the staff say, that their intention to propose a rulemaking. But Mr. Chairman, that's definitely how I envision this playing out.
Thank you. Despite this being a bad law, we will execute it. We will issue the regulations, and we'll hear comments after it's published in the Register, and we will have an order to follow. So parties could bank on that. Ms. Knoll, did we have anything else?
Your Honor, now that we've added the term dual service utility, I'm just trying to decide if we need to have a definition of that in here before you all take your motion. I guess we technically don't have to, but we all in this room know what we meant. But 30 years from now, I might not.
Maybe perhaps instead of the word dual service, a utility that provides both gas and electric service. Would that work?
I like it.
Okay. I earned my pay today. Before we call a vote, do any commissioners wish to speak?
Mr. Chairman, if it is okay with the chair, I will explain my vote at that time.
Yes, sir. I'm glad we made this on time today. I know it was a little bit rushed, but some of these issues I think we could spend the next 6 weeks out here and not reach resolution. I would move to publish the proposed regulations as noticed by the Commission in the docket on September 2nd, 2022, as amended during this 3-day rulemaking session in the Maryland Register for notice and comment subject to non-substantive changes necessary to conform to COMAR drafting requirements. And I move that we revise the regulations in the following subtitles as follows: COMAR Title 20, Subtitle 51, Subtitle 53, Subtitle 54, and Subtitle 59 as discussed throughout this rulemaking session. The vote begins with Commissioner Bubar.
Aye.
Commissioner Linton.
Mr. Chairman, I would vote aye, and I guess the only thing I would add is that this is, and I'm sure we've heard this throughout the course of this of these 3 hearings, but this law is very basic in its idea, but it's trying to adapt to a very complicated industry. And while I think the regulations, as the best we can, get us to the point where the statute can be implemented, I've said before that I think that the concept is incorrect. The original adoption of the legislation very much so looked at protecting low-income customers. And I know that over the years there's been some loss there. We haven't, and certainly this commission hasn't been part of that, but we've had some challenges with earlier commissions that were not as aggressive in protecting consumers, and so we've had some loss along the way. But the EUSP program was specifically added there to make sure that low-income customers could participate, because there was the belief that there would be a way to have lower rates for everybody. And we've seen these cyclical features happen in this industry. The rates are very high now. They will come down eventually. And once they do, this is going to be the regulation that's going to be it's going to stand between customers and suppliers that might be able to provide them at lower rates. So we'll see how it works out, and maybe I'll be wrong. I hope so. But like I said, it's cyclical. We've seen it before. So I think this is a good step for now. I wish we could have had a better one, but for now, I'll vote aye.
Thank you. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I vote no, although it's not clear to me what a no vote on these required regulations. And remember that the statute said we could do this by regulation or by order, and it gave us the option. We chose to go by regulation, maybe on advice, but I find that this law was maybe well intended, but very poorly written, and that comes from a perspective of someone who spent 21 and a half years in the legislature writing very complicated laws, dissecting very complicated laws. I think that the intention was good, but the execution is impossible in this environment. I also find that there are so many loopholes now built into these regulations. We've effectively neutered enforcement. We've given affirmative defenses to suppliers who don't come into compliance. We have added words like reasonable efforts to ascertain the assistance status of a household, using a laundry list of techniques, including but not limited to. These are expansive words that just blow big holes in all of this, in my opinion. One of them in that list is ask the customer, ask the person you're trying to sell something to. We also heard from Ms. Peltier today of products she's been offered, and if we think these regs are going to protect consumers from that kind of offering, they're not. It's going to continue, notwithstanding the good intention of the law. And lastly, I think we've made it unenforceable for our compliance enforcement unit in our CAD. It won't be enforceable. We've heard that from our director of CAD, and I heard her very clearly that it's not going to be enforceable. I think these are overly complicated regulations that create one hell of a mess. I think every party at the table and everybody who's spoken on this and everybody at the bench who's going to vote yes on this has good intentions, but you know what they say about the road to hell being paved with good intentions, and I think that that's where this is going to end up. Lastly, I will just say that I don't think any supplier in the near future is going to avail themselves of all this effort and good intentions anytime soon, and I think at the crux of it, that really was the original intent. But I vote no.
Thank you, Commissioner Richard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I will vote yes and agree with Commissioner Linton. I think while this is a complicated bill, I think this is a very good start. I think these are important, vital new protections to OHEP customers, and I feel good about the work we've done today to actually put it in a practical and enforceable standing. And it was important to me that I heard from advocates like Ms. Peltier that that we have put in, we will, with the appropriate follow-on order, we can provide the staff with the information they need to effectively enforce and make sure that OHEP customers are protected from a retail supplier that does not return them to SOS. So with that, I do vote yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I would like to associate myself with a lot of the comments that Commissioner O'Donnell just raised. This is a statute that I've said countless times has good intentions. And like most laws and regulations, they will be adhered to by those suppliers that are upstanding, that follow, that pay for counsel, represented by RISA and NRG and others. And we've heard from Ms. Peltier that there are others at the Walmart are calling, selling the product at 36 or 39 cents unconscionable rates. I'd like to say I'm optimistic that these regs will allow us to enforce and make no mistake, we will execute the law. We will promulgate regulations per the timetable of the statute. I do question whether any retail suppliers in this environment will be seeking approval of this commission to make an offer to low-income households. We spent a lot of time, you've spent a lot of money, retail suppliers, the poor utilities at the outset. My sympathy goes out to the utilities for getting wrapped up into this legislation where you have no reason to be. We'll see where this goes. I would encourage, if the wheels start falling off, that those in this room petition your elected officials to go about seeing if a change to the statute could be effectuated to make these work, to put real teeth in them so we could protect customers that need to be protected, so we can ensure that public funds used to support low-income energy assistance are being used to the fullest extent practical. I vote aye. The regulations are approved on a 4-1 vote. Before we conclude today, I'd just like to thank a number of people, Ms. Knoll in particular, for being our unbiased shepherd of going through all of these red lines, to our technical staff, Mr. Baker, Mr. Albert, and your team behind you, and to all of the parties, the utilities, the suppliers, the advocates, the municipalities that participated. We recognize that marking up the straw man wasn't easy, and then combining 4 or 5 red line versions into the straw man so we could walk through this. My vision is not what it once was, and it was hard for some of you, and I know the folks at home on YouTube were unable to view those, so my apologies to the 3 of you who are watching in cyberspace. As I stated, there will be an opportunity for comment or protest of these proposed regulations when they're published in the Maryland Register. Thank you for your patience. This rulemaking session is adjourned.